Moon Knight may not have seemed to be tied into the wider Marvel Cinematic Universe, but what was with that Falcon and the Winter Soldier shoutout? And was that a hippo? Keep watching for the Easter eggs in Moon Knight that totally slipped by you. In the second episode of Moon Knight, after being fired, Stephen Grant decides to investigate the clues found in his apartment. That leads him to a very Raiders of the Lost Ark-style building filled with storage units. The contents of number 43 reveal a whole lot about Marc Spector, but one thing that may go unnoticed is the date on his passport. The passport was issued in December of 2018, which doesn't mean much by itself until one takes into account that the snap in Avengers Infinity War occurred earlier that year. From that, we can conclude that Moon Knight has been active for the last 5 years or so, either in his superhero persona or just as Marc Spector, meaning that he was part of the population that didn't disappear during the snap. He also shares a birthday with the man portraying him, Oscar Isaac, which is a neat little connection, though Spector is 8 years younger than Isaac. As it stands, Moon Knight is keeping its connection to the MCU subtle, but there was a notable reference to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier in Episode 2. Stephen Grant tries his hand at fighting a jackal-like creature in the streets, but eventually gives in and allows the more experienced Marc Spector to take over in an exciting transformation sequence. The shot just after this shows a full view of the London bus featuring an ad for the Global Repatriation Council, also known as the GRC. This is an organization that was plot crucial to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. After half of the Earth's living creatures suddenly returned, most of the humans would need help getting resituated, reuniting with family, finding work, or just coming to grips with what happened. That's what the GRC provides. It makes sense that there would still be some promotions for the group at this time, but as an extra nod to Moon Knight, the full ad reads, "Reuniting you with your better half." Though it might be an odd word choice for single people who came back in the blip, it works perfectly for the character of Moon Knight at this moment. Oh, and one more quick Easter egg here. It flashes by quick and is upside down for the viewer, but the top of the bus also has WBN 0032 printed on top of it, a reference to Werewolf by Night number 32, Moon Knight's comics debut. As Layla and Steven get to know each other a bit better in his flat, she snoops around his belongings in an attempt to figure out what happened to Marc Spector, her husband. Looking across his book collection, she spies a familiar name, a collection of poems from Marceline Desbordes-Valmore. A moment later, Steven begins reciting one of the poems called Les Séparés, translating to apart, aloud in French, and Layla joins in, saying the lines with him.
She's my favorite poet.
No, she's my favorite.
The implication of how this knowledge subconsciously worked its way into the creation of the Stephen Grant identity is quite interesting. On a different but equally deep note, the poem itself discusses two separated lovers and repeats "do not write," which in this case could reference the fact that Marc cut off communication with her other than mailing divorce papers. To further this a bit and help connect it back to Moon Knight, the poem goes on to say, "To knock at my heart is like knocking at a tomb," which ties into any number of scenes in the series. There are also a couple quick Easter eggs in the following sequence once Stephen is captured by Harrow's bogus agents. His file number begins with 1975, the year Moon Knight debuted in the comics, and the agent assigned him is listed as Nick Pepin, a production manager on Moon Knight. Stephen Grant seems like a lonely guy, so it's no surprise that he would befriend someone who's a captive audience and appears to be a good listener. When most viewers saw him talking to the golden living statue, they assumed it was potentially a reference or sly nod to something from the comics, and some even guessed correctly who it was. But one of the show's writers has now officially confirmed that the silent busker is in fact another of Moon Knight's allies, Bertrand Crawley. Posing as a living statue makes sense, as Crawley likes to embrace his dramatic side at times, and being out in public like that also helps in his role as a street-level informant. This version of the character doesn't have flies swarming around him or many teabags handy, but when he does finally speak, it will most likely be in the character's posh British accent. The former textbook salesman might not be speaking to Stephen currently because in the comics he is the contact of another personality, Jake Lockley, meaning that this odder version of the familiar face could be throwing him off. Crawley's inclusion could also lead to a future villain, his son known as Slasher, or it could just be a clever cameo. Either way, many fans are hoping to see more of the character soon. During the sham of a trial against Arthur Harrow in episode 3, Khonshu speaks to the other Egyptian gods and begs them to pay more attention to this realm and leave the Overvoid. It's a word that is easy to miss during an impassioned scene, but this reference also hints at where most of these other gods reside. That is, if they aren't spending their time as a stone statue or palling around Earth with their avatars in an incorporeal form with a disembodied voice. These gods, unlike some of the creatures that are called gods in the MCU, but are more like aliens, such as the Asgardians and Eternals, cannot physically walk upon the realm of man with their full power. This is why they need avatars like Marc Spector and Stephen Grant in the first place. As such, the Overvoid, sometimes called the Celestial Heliopolis, is where the gods exist on a different plane or pocket dimension. In the comics, the Overvoid is sometimes depicted as a floating white pyramid, and is mentioned that the gods used to be able to move freely across the realms, but have been trapped there now for quite some time. In this, the Overvoid acts as a majestic home, but also a prison, giving the gods an excuse not to interfere in Earth's affairs. Without the magic scarab to guide him, Marc Spector and Layla have to discern where Amit's tomb could be another way. This eventually leads him to Anton Mogart and his collection of stolen antiquities. He classifies it as preservation, but it isn't hard to see that he's beyond wealthy and gets what he wants. When we first see Mogart, he is showing off on horseback and seems to have a way with Layla, but plays the charismatic and welcoming host. Things go awry shortly after, and Moon Knight ends up fighting Mogart and his armed guards. This is all a familiar rivalry from the comics. Mogart is known as Midnight Man in the comics, a thief who strikes precisely at the stroke of midnight. During one of his scrapes with Moon Knight, Mogart was washed into the sewers and disfigured, driving the villain mad and putting him on a path of revenge. Including Midnight Man in the show seemed to be setting up storylines for future seasons, but tragically the actor who played Mogart, Gaspar Ulliel, passed away in January 2022. Whether Marvel will choose to recast the role or not remains to be seen. As Layla points out to Marc in episode 3, they're in her home now, Cairo, Egypt. Seeing these two working together is entertaining, but it is heavily hinted at that this isn't Layla's first rodeo. During an exchange with Anton Mogart's bodyguard, we learn that she and Mogart got tangled up on a previous mission, and the location of that mission will sound very familiar to fans of the MCU.
After Madripoor, I'm sure you two will have a lot to talk about.
The Principality of Madripoor is a haven for pirates, criminals, and entrepreneurs without morals. It's a dangerous place with a clear class divide and almost no laws, which is perfect for someone trying to hunt down stolen relics or just as a location to make the trade. This island was shown off in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier alongside Sharon Carter's power broker character, who was rumored to have a cameo in Moon Knight, though that ultimately didn't happen. Moon Knight evidently enjoys its deep cuts from the comics and assigning people obscure names that only appear in a single issue. This seems to be the case with Karish Beck, who is simply referred to as Beck in the show and acts as a bodyguard of Anton Mogart. When Layla and Marc meet Mogart in Egypt, Beck is one of the first people to interact with them and appears to be familiar with Layla's past. It isn't long before Marc gets caught acting suspiciously and the fighting begins. As Moon Knight springs into action, Layla keeps Beck busy. Beck uses a knife during his altercation with Layla, which makes total sense as his comic book counterpart utilizes glass knives filled with acidic fluids. It's a somewhat strange choice of a weapon, but one fitting an assassin who belongs to an organization called the Slayers Elite. In the comics, those acid-filled blades would be the end of Beck. He fell on them while trying to murder Moon Knight and died as a result. When his contact in Cairo is murdered by men loyal to Amit, Marc Spector has no choice but to beat the information he needs out of the killers. He shows some hesitation when it comes to hitting the youngest of these assailants, who is stylishly dressed in a denim jacket. The print on the back of his jacket is mostly white with a spattering of teal and purple, but the design itself is what's interesting here. Only extremely perceptive viewers and comic book scholars will recognize this as a reference to Pharaoh Ramatut. Ramatut is one of the many incarnations of Kang the Conqueror, or in MCU terms, He Who Remains, who fans met in the Loki series. As a time traveler, Kang has a long and complicated history. Ramatut is one of the many personas he's adopted during his infinite quest to control time. Throughout the series, there are multiple hints that Marc was somehow involved in the murder of Layla's father. Layla naturally presses Marc to find out the truth, which is finally revealed when Marc says,
My partner got greedy and
He executed everyone at the dig site.
Viewers later learned what comics fans already knew, that Marc's partner was a vicious killer named Raul Bushman. Pretty much everything we see in the show is right out of the comics. When Marc tried to stop Bushman from murdering a group of archaeologists, Bushman shot Marc and left him for dead, leading to Khonshu's intervention and the creation of Moon Knight. There is one difference, though. In the comics, Marc's lover is called Marlene. The show took Marlene's backstory, including Marc's involvement in the death of her father, and used it to create the new character of Layla Abdallah Al-Fuli. Given how much his relationship with Marc has been set up, chances seem pretty high that we'll eventually see Bushman in the TV show. Whether or not we'll see the gruesome end of their rivalry remains to be seen, as in the comics, Moon Knight killed him by cutting his face off. That doesn't sound very Disney. After Marc Spector is shot by Harrow, he falls into a pool of water. He wakes up in what appears to be some sort of asylum, complete with bingo, orderlies, what looks like an authentic Marvel Moon Knight action figure, as well as plenty of familiar faces and a drawing of Khonshu. There are many things present to convince Steven that everything he thought had been going on for the last 4 episodes didn't happen, but the best may be Tombbuster. This fake VHS tape is a mixture of Indiana Jones and Tomb Raider, a low-budget title that our hero could be pulling his fantasies from, with the appropriate amount of cheesy dialogues, sets, and knockoff music.
At least now we know what happened to Pullman Taubin.
Yes. And to anyone who chooses a path of greed.
It's a clever setup, a brilliant change of pace, and allows Ethan Hawke to channel Carl Jung, who the actor told Entertainment Weekly helped guide his portrayal of the asylum version of Harrow. What viewers may not know, though, is that this setting was inspired by the 2016 comic story Moon Knight Lunatic, which put Marc in this exact position to examine his grasp on reality. In the final moments of Episode 4, Marc Spector and Stephen Grant are surprised to run into a giant hippopotamus. And who can blame them?
Hi.
It may be a giant anthropomorphic creature dressed in ancient Egyptian garb, but considering their current situation, her appearance turns out to be a blessing. This is Taweret, the Egyptian goddess of childbirth and fertility. As much as her appearance might have been a surprise to some viewers, it was actually set up in the first episode. While working in the museum gift shop, Donna asks Grant to grab a box of stuffed hippos, which leads him to offering some unwanted info on who Taweret is. It's a small reference that also helps to show off more of our hero's vast Egyptian knowledge, and this little tidbit makes for an entertaining note during a rewatch. Part of Episode 5 sees Taweret, the hippo goddess, acting as a sort of post-life tour guide for Marc and Steven. After some joint yelling, the two begin to realize that this depiction of Putnam Medical Facility, called Putnam Psychiatric Hospital in the comics, where Marc Spector was sent as a kid, is actually a part of their journey through the afterlife. But the hospital itself isn't the only Easter egg. During the conversation, Taweret mentions that there are other versions of the afterlife as well.
You'd be surprised how many intersectional planes of untethered consciousness exist.
Yeah.
Like the ancestral plane. Oh, just gorgeous.
This isn't just another part of Egyptian mythology she's praising, however, but the ancestral plane from the Black Panther film. This is a fun line that brings Moon Knight a bit closer to the MCU proper. It makes perfect sense that Taweret would mention it as well, considering her connection to Bast, who in Egyptian mythology was a cat goddess, and in the MCU is the Panther goddess of Wakanda. We mostly see it as a place where the various Black Panthers journey to speak to the dead and seek wisdom, but there's potentially much more that could be done with this realm if Marvel ever wanted to do a small crossover into the afterlife shown at the end of Moon Knight. In Episode 5, Marc Spector and Stephen Grant attempt to balance their scales, and that means exploring several deep memories and facing some harsh truths about their past. Part of this is learning about the death of a boy affectionately called Roro, who was actually Randall Rand Spector, Marc's younger brother. In this MCU version of Moon Knight, Marc is blamed for the unexpected accident that takes his brother's life. Things are somehow even worse in the comics, though. In the show, Marc's mother accuses him of being jealous of his younger sibling, but it's the other way around in the source material. Rand doesn't die as a child, but instead grows up to be an insane serial killer supervillain called Hatchet Man, who is obsessed with destroying his older brother Marc. Rand eventually becomes a twisted mirror of Moon Knight called Shadow Knight, and the Punisher is forced to kill him to end his reign of terror. Does Rand's rich comic history imply that the MCU version may have somehow survived? Given that ancient gods brought Marc back from the dead twice during the course of the show, anything is possible. As Marc and Steven journey through their collective mind, we are shown several interesting things, but most of the hard-to-catch references were in their childhood room. Much of the bedroom is set up purposefully to look as it did in the run of comics by Jeff Lemire and Greg Smallwood. This includes the race car bed and a specific poster on the wall for Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope, which doubles as a nod to actor Oscar Isaac being a part of the franchise in the newest trilogy. There are also toys lying around, pictures on the walls, and a Cubs banner to let everyone know we're in Chicago, but a couple of things may have gone unnoticed. The item that comes into focus first is the name Bluebird on the wing of an airplane, which some comic book scholars think may reference an obscure Spider-Man character, though it's possibly just a coincidence. However, in that same shot, we get our first glance at the many astronaut figures that the imaginative young hero has. This is likely another comic reference to another personality of Marc's who was an astronaut that fought werewolves. Which might sound like an odd combination, but astronaut werewolves are surprisingly common in the Marvel Universe. Also, more simply, astronauts go to the moon, and Moon Knight is, well, you get the idea. Finally, just below the scales in Marc's room, another recurring motif throughout the show, is a pair of gray nunchaku. In the comics, the Fist of Khonshu originally uses a truncheon to fight with, which he first modifies for use as nunchaku in the 1980 issue Moon Knight #2. These are a couple of nice subtle nods that don't feel out of place in the childhood memory and may have helped influence Marc's future adventures. There's so much to see in young Marc's bedroom, but one thing in particular stands out that was made just for the show: the Tomb Buster poster. If you look closely, you can see a couple fun things on it. Doug Perlin is the name given to the lead actor for Tomb Buster, which is a clever homage to Moon Knight's creators, Doug Mensch and Don Perlin. And the poster also shows that the film was presented by Timely Atlas Studios, which is another instance of two names, Timely Comics and Atlas Comics shoved together. Timely is what Marvel Comics was known as in the 1940s, while Atlas is what they were called in the 1950s. It's an extremely deep cut for most viewers, but that poster also begs to be stared at, so it works out. Before the show's release, many viewers were wondering about whether or not this iteration of Moon Knight in the MCU would remain Jewish, as he is in the comics. His heritage and religion are a key part of Marc Spector, especially since his father was a rabbi. It's a deep part of the character and important for representation. Thankfully, there was some hope given to those who wanted to see this mentioned in the series when director Mohammed Diab posted on Twitter that fans who are curious about that aspect of the character would be pleased. And they were. While in the asylum going through their memories, Marc and Steven must discuss their mother's death, which brings up the line,
Dad called me after all these years about her Shiva, and I couldn't do it.
In Judaism, Shiva is the first 7 days of mourning, the observance of which is sometimes referred to as sitting Shiva in English. Plus, when the two characters revisit this specific memory, we also see Marc dressed in all black wearing a yarmulke. These elements give the audience insights into Marc's religious background and acknowledge his following of the traditions, all while Marc and Steven are dealing with the weight of their own present death. Just as Marc and Steven begin working together and find their balance, one of them has to go and get thrown overboard. During the fight at the end of episode 5, Steven taps into the side of Marc that can wield a bat just before he throws himself into helping Marc a bit too much and hits the sands. At first, he tries to catch up with the boat, but Steven is quickly overcome by sands, freezing him there. It's a sad scene that comes just when things are looking up, but we all should have seen it coming because it was actually teased right at the start of the series. In the first episode, when Stephen Grant is still blissfully ignorant of his other life, he shows off his knowledge in the museum where he works. He speaks to a young girl about pyramids, death, and being judged, only for her to come back at him with a couple of confusing questions, including,
"And did it suck for you, getting rejected from the field of reeds?"
Well, that don't make sense, because I'm not dead, am I?
Stephen is understandably confused, but now we know that the child was either aware of his future or perhaps just a bit cruel. We all knew Layla was destined for great things, but the Season 1 Moon Knight finale nearly outdoes itself in that regard when Layla unexpectedly becomes a superhero herself. After rejecting the offer to become the avatar of Khonshu, she instead becomes an avatar of Taweret. After Harrow attempts to bury her inside the pyramid, Layla is seen bursting through the wall in a glorious new costume. She wastes no time with her newfound powers, fighting by her husband's side and saving lives. After she rescues one group, an awestruck girl asks the new avatar if she's an Egyptian superhero, and it's a big moment for a lot of people. It wasn't really unexpected though, as there were hints throughout, including Khonshu calling her a quote, little bug. That's significant because Layla may or may not be a version of the comic character Scarlet Scarab. In the comics, the Scarlet Scarab is an Egyptian superhero identity taken on by a father and son duo named Faul. Naturally, fans connected the dots between the Scarlet Scarab and this new MCU hero embodied by Layla El Fuli. However, there are some differences, as the comics version of Scarlet Scarab is not connected to Tawere, but rather gets his powers from an ancient magical artifact. Moon Knight director Mohamed Diab has been coy about whether or not Layla is technically Scarlet Scarab, telling Collider that while unofficially she is the Scarlet Scarab, they intentionally left it vague so they could officially decide later. On set, we were calling her Scarlet Scarab. I would love to keep it open because I don't know how things are going to go. I'd rather keep it open for her. The post-credit scene in the season finale of Moon Knight pleased many fans with the final reveal of the Jake Lockley personality as well as the comics-accurate depictions of the white limo complete with Spectre vanity plates and Khonshu's crisp suit. But there's another fun Easter egg that avid readers would have spotted. The name of the facility that Arthur Harrow has been abducted from is the Sienkiewicz Psychiatric Hospital, named after renowned comic book artist Bill Sienkiewicz. Sienkiewicz is a prolific and revolutionary artist, known for his uncommon style and methods of blending in traits from other practitioners of the craft. Sienkiewicz not only worked on the first Moon Knight book in 1980, but he provided many great covers and insides for the hero for years afterward. In fact, many believe that the character of Moon Knight owes much of its success to Sienkiewicz. It seems fitting that the show, which will hopefully help Marc and company to continue to grow with more new fans, pays tribute to him in a fun way during the final scene. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite shows are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.